Hi everybody! Guess what I bought? I got some new desert rose. And while they don't look like much now, they will look like that, hopefully in the future. Here is the second one. And you can see when you purchase them, let me go out in the sun. When you purchase a desert rose in the mail, this is a desert rose here, and this is a desert rose here. When you purchase them in the mail, they send you just the bare root clipping, and then you've got to take care of it, plant it, and get it to grow. So these are a couple, I would say probably 5, maybe 7 years old. This one is probably a year, maybe 2. And these are the ones, if you recall from another video I made, that I bought from Home Depot about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. This one has already decided it's going to flower. And this one is still thinking about what it wants to do. I think it's putting all of its energy into some new root growth though, which is fine. I'm not opposed to that. And still don't know what color it is though. So it'll be a surprise for all of us. So in potting desert rose, you need a couple of different mix blends that we're gonna mix together. The majority of our mix, about 80% of it, will be the cactus potting mix. Another 10% will be, you could use 100% of the cocoa coir. I was not able to find that, so I'm going to use this. In my others, I've used dendrobium mix, which are fine also. I did a little sand also just to aerate the soil and make it less dense. But this will be fine, and it was actually cheaper than the dendrobium mix. And what good gardener doesn't have? A little bit of manure laying around. So we'll mix a little bit of that. So 80% on the cactus mix, 10% on some other type of rough mix, whether it's an orchid mix or the coconut fiber, and 10% manure. There are a ton of videos out there on what you can do with desert rose. They are kind of like a bonsai. You know, you can shape the stems in all different directions to make them look windswept and, you know, mashed down and all kinds of stuff. There's tons of videos on how to build up what's called the caudex, which is the big root system. Some people like a really big fat root system that's all bulbousy and kind of wild. And then some people like to cut the base off completely. Hi Macy, yes. You like the way that smells? Note to self, these are poisonous to pets. So if you have dogs or cats in the house that tend to like to get into your plants, maybe avoid this one. I'm fortunate that my dogs don't really care about plants. There are some folks that will cut off the base of this right about here. And imagine putting this on a very flat surface and then having it so that the roots radiate out. And if I can find a picture, I'll insert it here. But they call that having radial roots. And there are some really cool orchids after, 50 years that have these amazing radial roots. But you have to repot them every week as you grow the roots and all that kind of stuff. So I don't really have that kind of time. I did not do anything with the two that are out here. They just kind of grew however they wanted to. And the only thing that I did, of course, was repotted them. They went from the 2 terracotta pots there on the back left into the 2 bigger pots here on the right. And when I did that, I of course raised them up. And let's talk about what that means. So when you have a desert rose, you might have the soil line here, right? And all you see then is what's above that soil line. Well, all this is growing under the ground. And so when you repot it, you raise it up to bring the soil line maybe to here, so that you then can see all of this new growth, and you've got your soil line here. And then after maybe a year, you do it again. And you continue to do that probably once a year, depending on, you know, how much you want to expose. And so that's how you get those caudexes that get really big and fat. I've got to trim all this extra root since I repotted this a while ago, and I'll show you how we do that later. But anything that's not touching the soil needs to come off. So like that one, and I can trim these back too. So I'll show you what that looks like, but I wanted to just talk about why how you get this amazing like root system to show. You have to kind of pull it up out of the ground and repot it. And these 2 little ones, as you could see, when I first bought them, I think the soil line was right about here. So I only planted it just a little bit more shallow because these are still pretty young. But you can see there's quite a bit of growth already happening. And same with this one, that's got a nice big bulb caudex. So we'll see what it looks like in a year or so. They say that when you're going to pot one of these new little doodads, and by they, I mean the people who post videos on YouTube about this subject, say that you're supposed to have 5 inches of space between the caudex and the planter. So if that were in the middle, this one is a little narrow, and I'm going to put the smaller one in here because it's a little bit narrower, and then this big one, the bigger one, is going to go in here, and I can show you that that will give us the 5 inches that we need. This one's going to be a little short, but I think it'll be okay. And I also liked out how that worked because I didn't want to plant the yellow flower in the yellow base and the purple flower in the purple base. Now, of course, some people might like that and they want to matchy match, but I'm going to love the contrast of this yellow flower against that purple base. Is going to look really pretty, and vice versa. The purple flower against the yellow base will be nice. So this pot that I had laying around is naturally yellow. I bought it that way. This was a unattractive brown, and you can guess who did the artwork for that. Of course, Mark Morgan. And I picked this up at the store because I do have another desert rose coming in the mail, and I knew I was going to need another pot, and I might try some aerial roots with that one, since this is a more narrow, shallower but wider pan. So maybe I'll get aggressive and decide to do the radial roots on that one. But anyway, let's get into this. Now that we got that all mixed up, I like to throw a little bit of some fertilizer. This is a I believe a 16, 16, 16, but it's a pretty all-around blend. I'm going to throw a little bit more in there. You know how much I love doing stuff one-handed. Okay. Before I start throwing my mix in there, I noticed that the holes are pretty big. And I don't want all of my fresh soil to just run through it and fall out. So, coffee filters are not just for coffee. So another thing I learned is that they don't like air pockets around their roots. So I'm going to, if you can tell, I kind of piled up the dirt a little bit. And so what's going to happen now is I'm going to kind of wiggle this down into the soil, and that will help to prevent air pockets. The other thing that you can do is take a stick and kind of just tap around the roots there so that you make sure all those little holes get filled in. Okay, I've got that in there pretty tight, and I'm just going to sprinkle a little more of my fertilizer on there. And then just cover it up a little bit. Alright, and I left the tag on it just in case I forget which one it is. But once it starts to bloom and flower, obviously we'll take that off. But I think that's going to be pretty cool. Let's see what grows. Okay, round 2. Time to make some more soil and get this puppy planted. Hey, there we go. I think I might make this the front. Not that it necessarily matters which way the tag faces, but fantastic. So the other thing is that since these are fresh, they need to stay in the shade for a little bit before they get put out in the sun. Otherwise they'll get sunburned. So they'll stay here in the patio near the Phalaenopsis, who also don't like a lot of sun. They'll stay in here for about a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, just to let them rest. They did just come out of a mailing package where they spent a week in the mail. So they need to rest a little bit, get some nutrients, and then we will put them out in the sun gradually. I will introduce them into the area where the dendrobiums are under the cover, and then they'll spend probably a week there, and then they'll go out full blast into the full sun with the rest of them. Let's take a look at our chrysalis. One, two, 3. That is a freshly hatched monarch butterfly. He is drying his wings, which he'll do for probably about an hour, and then he'll take flight, and eventually he'll come back, enjoy the milkweed, lay his eggs, and complete the life cycle. Our other desert rose came in the mail today. That's what it's going to look like, hopefully. So I think I'm going to try to do a radial root like we had talked about. And I believe that means that I will need to cut it maybe somewhere around here to remove all of the rest of the caudex. So I'm going to do a little bit more research before I start knifing into this thing. But I think that this is going to be beautiful. Okay, I did it. I bit the bullet and I cut right into it. So I'm going to cut this next piece away. And there you can see I removed everything. And now we just have this little this little stump. One random thing that I did learn about desert rose is that cinnamon has some natural antifungal, antimicrobial properties. So I'm going to sprinkle some cinnamon on the areas that we've cut, and that will prevent any fungus or anything from growing. You know, I'm really not good with one hand, so I'm going to show you an attempt here, but the reality is I'm going to have to use two hands. Okay. From what I understand now, this has to sit for 24 hours to kind of dry out before we plant it. So the next time we see this, I guess, I'll be doing a little potting video. I'm curious, if I potted this, what would happen? Would something eventually grow? Macy seems to think so. Let's give it a try. I didn't make a video because it was late at night when I did it and it was dark out and I was tired. It was late after work, but I did put this was the one that we cut, and I planted the base. I mean, I'm not really sure if it'll grow, but it was better than just throwing it away and never knowing. So hopefully this will produce some radial roots. There's a CD, an old CD underneath there to kind of flatten things out, and we'll see what happens. But these are going to sit in here like the other ones have. They've been in here a week now. They're going to go for another week in here in the shade, and then I'll slowly start to move them out. And these just started off, so they've got about maybe another 11 days to go. So we'll see. Doesn't look like we're going to be playing in the garden today. This desert rose has graduated from inside the patio out into the sun, and you can see it's starting to get some leaf growth. That's how I knew it was time for it to move out into the sun. This is the one that I cut in half. I put the bottom in a pot just to see if it did something, and I put the top. It is starting to get a little bit of leaf tip growth, just barely. So it's not quite ready to go out to the sun yet. And this one was not experiencing any growth, so I cut back the heads, put some cinnamon, and I'm going to give it another week. Let's have a look at how our desert roses are doing. You could see the one here on the left. This is the purple colored one. it's doing quite well. The other one that we had planted, which is the yellow one, is not quite doing much. And if you recall, I cut the tips because they were starting to dry out. I put some cinnamon on them to just prevent any fungus, and I'm just still waiting for them to think about what they want to do. And lastly, this was the pink one that we decided to try to do a radial root with. So if you remember, we did a flat base and I put a CD down underneath there. I've got a mosquito chasing me, and still waiting to see if it's going to put out some leaf. But in the meantime, while it's thinking about it, they stay in here. This one's ready to go. I had moved it out into a sunny spot, partially sunny spot, not quite full sun like where those are, because this is still a fresh. But I had put it here, and the problem was that it rained so much, it was getting too much water. And remember, they're desert roses, so they don't take a lot of water. These mature ones, they handled it. And even these over here did pretty well. But I didn't want those young seedling size to get too much. Speaking of, I think we finally know what color the flowers are going to be on this one. What do we have here? Someone seems stuck. What is going on the roof of... What are you all doing up there? It's like a pigeon party. So let's help our little friend out before the lizards have a meal.